The polls predicted it, and this time they were right.
They were right in the direction. I'm not sure they were right in the magnitude. There were some polls saying that the Democrats are going to win by 7 percentage points or something. Didn't turn out to be quite as wide a sweep as that. I think it's hard to get blue waves, it's hard to get red waves, it's hard to get waves in American politics now because voting patterns are so entrenched. But a swing of 3 percentage points was enough to give the Democrats control of one of the houses of Congress. And while that's not the kind of forceful repudiation that maybe we'd like to see in a Frank Capra movie of somebody like Trump, the effect of it is that the opposition controlled one of the houses of Congress, which means they can control committees, they can call witnesses to investigate Trump's many scandalous affairs. They can, for example, subpoena his tax returns. They can provide cover, if you will, for the Mueller investigation. If the Republicans were hoping to bury his report, that's not going to happen anymore. So it has real implications in terms of the way the United States is governed. Even aside from that, of course, in terms of legislation, they can propose legislation, they can block legislation. It's important to control one of the houses of Congress. People are talking about it being a mixed result. It is, but it's also an important result.
You mentioned the implications, but they're both going to have to work together. I mean, there will have to be some compromise or some give somewhere.
That's right. You know, we've seen divided rule, if you will, before in the U.S. In recent years. It does call upon people's powers of not just compromise, but persuasion. A lot of it is trying to paint the other guy as being more extreme or less willing to compromise, et cetera. And we've seen in the past how winning the midterms, winning control of the Congress, can bounce back on you. If you overread your mandate and you get too obstreperous, a skilled president can make you look like the bad guys. And so that's one of the things the Democrats have to caution themselves against, is not getting too rambunctious, realizing that they've got 51% of the public with them, but they've got 47, 48% of the public against them. So they've got to play their hand carefully and not get too far ahead of themselves.
Key races that stood out for you, or I guess numbers that emerged from different states that maybe, stood out for you?
Well, there were the big states that the Democrats were certainly hoping to take, not only in themselves, but for what they might mean in 2020. So they fell short, for example, in the much-watched governor and Senate races in Florida. And they fell short in the governor race in Ohio. And Ohio and Florida are very important in every election. They're the swing states. They're on the knife edge. And when you control the apparatus of government in those states, that can be important in terms of turnout, et cetera, in the election. So that's not insignificant. They did win governorships in Michigan and Wisconsin. And remember, those were some of the states that turned for Trump in the late going in the last election and basically handed him the election. So that's also an interesting harbinger. Beyond that, as I say, I just think that there's not huge movements. I guess maybe when you start drilling down into the overall numbers, you do see a swing towards the Democrats in the suburbs, and those have been a powerhouse for Republicans in recent elections. So if that's a harbinger of things to come, if some of those college-educated voters who might have held their nose and voted for Trump last time, voted Republican last time, got fed up this time and leaned back towards the Democrats. That's if I were a Republican, I'd be worried about that.
Post-midterm election, what are the implications for Canada and specifically this newly renegotiated trade deal, the USMCA?
Well, the short answer is we don't know. Traditionally, if it were more Democrats than Republicans in the Congress, you would say, oh, that's worrisome because Democrats tend to be more protectionist. They're more beholden to the unions, for example. That's not as clear nowadays. It's partly not clear because the Republicans under Trump have moved towards the protectionist side, and it's almost like an equal and opposite reaction. The Democrats have started to lean more in the area of free trade. So maybe there's some one of these realignments going on between the parties in that respect. And secondly, there's a difference between trying to sign a new treaty and trying to keep hold of an old one. If the issue was, can we sign a whole new free trade treaty with a Democratic Congress that they'd never contemplated before? Probably not. There would be a lot of change involved and a lot of interests that were threatened. When you've got an existing trade agreement with existing interests that are profiting from it, the status quo is your friend. Now, in this case, we've got a new, quote unquote, renegotiated NAFTA that is both new and old. It's preserving an old agreement, but it's also making some changes. So that makes it doubly hard to assess. You could get a situation where the new Congress refused to ratify this new treaty, in which case it would simply default back to, as I understand it, back to the existing NAFTA. And that's not bad either for Canada. That, in fact, would be better for Canada because the new treaty is in many ways inferior to the old. Of course, the wild card in that is how does Trump react to a defeat of that kind in the Congress? And again, we don't know. But all things considered, I think I see this as broadly, net positive for Canada, this result, because with Trump you have such a wild card and somebody who's willing to upset so many conventions and norms, and you have a Republican Party that seems more and more to be Trump's party. So if that party no longer controls all the levers of power in Washington, I think that's on balance good for Canada.
What does this path, the next 2 years, look like for the U.S. president, and what does 2020 possibly look like for him seeking a second term?
Well, as I say, he's certainly under the gun more, under more scrutiny. He's actually going to be held to account more, one hopes. The way the American system is supposed to work. The Congress is supposed to be a check and balance on the presidency, and it really hasn't been in the last couple of years. So that's tougher for him. That means he's going to be maybe have some of his secrets brought to light, and from the standpoint of democratic governance, that's good. From his standpoint, he does get somebody to run against. And again, we were talking about the dangers of the Democrats overplaying their hand, overreading their mandate. History is full of examples of presidents who ran against the quote-unquote do-nothing Congress, who ran against gridlock, or who ran against, overweening congressmen who thought they were the president.
Do the Democrats have a solid contender?
No, they have a bunch of people that they're kicking the tires on, and that's much to be seen. I think one note of optimism, at least from my standpoint, for the Democrats is this was a race in which moderate Democrats did quite well, and a moderate Democratic message did very well. Some of the more radical, I don't mean bad in a pejorative sense, but just more radical contenders for the Democrats did not do as well in this election. So the Democrats are, on balance, a more moderate-looking party than they were previously, whereas the Republicans, a lot of their moderates were defeated. And so the Republicans look even more in the grip of Trump than they did before. So if politics is a test, a contest for the middle ground, on balance, I would say the Democrats come out looking more like the centrist Mr. and Mrs. America right now than the Republicans do.